There are many obstacles that can block the path to a successful software project. When you come across one, it helps to think like a seasoned hiker and follow the trail marked by blue blazes around the problem so that you can get back on course and keep moving forward. Welcome to Blue Blazes Podcast. I'm your host for the journey, Jay Tower, and I'm a partner and principal consultant at Trailhead Technology Partners. In this series, we talk with industry experts who share their best tips for avoiding the pitfalls on the path to successful software projects. My guest on this episode of Blue Blazes is Mike Hartington. Mike's a developer, Angular GDE, and the Director of Developer Advocacy at Ionic. He's been working in the mobile landscape for most of his professional career, and when he's not working on Ionic itself, Mike works with community members and helps them succeed at their mobile projects. In his spare time, he's also an aspiring woodworker, occasional musician, and craft beer lover. In this episode, Mike and I discuss hybrid mobile app development and how it can help make mobile projects more predictably successful. With a growing number of options for building mobile apps, it's a very useful and timely conversation that I think you'll enjoy. So let's jump in. Well, hey, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you and great to have a chance to talk to you a little bit about Ionic and about building hybrid mobile applications. Can you tell me a little bit about what Ionic is and how it helps you build these things called hybrid mobile apps?
Yeah, so Ionic is a company, platform, whatever you want to call us, where we provide you a collection of components, a native runtime, and an additional set of paid tools and services to help take you from building out the app, accessing native features, but then also being able to ship that app to your users and kind of ship updates on the fly whenever you really need them.
Nice. And what advantages, there's a ton of technologies today that you can use to build mobile applications, it seems like. What advantages are there to building them with web-based technologies in your mind?
I think one of the main advantages, I think, is familiarity. I think a lot of tools out there, if you're a web developer, there is some learning that you need to do to feel comfortable and productive in certain cross-platform solutions, because it's web adjacent, but not necessarily the same web that you're maybe used to building websites and web apps. The time that you need to invest to get up to speed is pretty significant. With Ionic, because it is all web-based from the ground up, you're able to be productive right away. You might spend some time looking for what are the components I need to use, but you don't need to rethink on and relearn how you would style those components. You're just using CSS and just using the JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks that you are probably already using in your day-to-day.
Yeah. So if you've got already a web development team that's building a web application, they know front-end technologies, maybe they know some back-end technologies if they're full stack. If you've already got that team and you want to add a mobile app to that existing web application, a lot of times if you're going to use other technologies, you got to go hire mobile developers that know all the right tech stack. So in this case, you don't need to do that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. You could take whether this is a large company or maybe you're a small-ish consultancy and you just need to get stuff shipped out, and it's really kind of content-based versus anything like 3D graphics. This is where the kind of key persona would be, where we are somebody who just needs to ship something, and we have a team of really talented web developers who are comfortable working in those technologies. They can go front end or back end, but they're still able to keep the momentum that they would normally have if they were working on the web.
One of the things that native mobile development is notorious for, especially if you're doing everything twice, once for Android and once for iOS, is is being very slow or time consuming to build a mobile app. So does using web technologies help with that as well?
I think so. A lot of what you can do with Ionic is spend most of your time developing in the browser. Because it is all
Mm,
web based, you can prototype pretty quickly right in the browser, get all the styles, get all the device emulations from like Chrome DevTools, where you can say emulate an Android device or emulate an iOS device. And
mhm,
then once you need to get onto the native devices, you can still enable a live reload server. So
mhm.
that way, as you're developing locally, it could be on a simulator, on a real physical device. You can have those changes update automatically and still have that feedback cycle that web developers require. And that includes adding and accessing things like device capabilities that you could need for taking photos, accessing the file system, what have you.
Yeah. What about since you're talking about building stuff that's essentially HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files that are getting wrapped inside of a mobile app? What about doing updates to those files without having to release an app update in the store? Is that something that's possible?
It's something that's possible. It's a very fine line between what Apple's terms of service allows. But basically, if your app is utilizing any web technology to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, those contents can be updated on the fly. So if for whatever reason uh, you were the unlucky person that day to ship a API, the wrong API URL, you could deploy an update that would automatically patch that. And next time users go to open up your apps, it'll automatically download a Delta and apply that change to your source code and cache everything locally. So your app can have all the updates if you want it to, or you can just delete the old updates as they see fit.
Well, that's a pretty cool upgrade over native mobile apps where if you had a mistake like that, you'd have to release an update through the App Store, which can be time consuming, and then you have to actually wait for your end users to download it. You can't force it and all that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I will say the one thing that does that you do need to worry about is if you are accessing, say, a certain set of native features and then you want to add another one, you do need to go through the whole resubmit because that does involve including native code. And that's the one kind of caveat that
Mhm.
I think throws people off is they think, well, I'll just update the native code. It's like, no, you got to resubmit at that point
Yeah.
because Apple likes to make sure that that stuff goes through all the security processes.
Yeah, when you think about what Apple is looking for in those reviews, that makes a lot of sense that they wouldn't
Yeah.
want to allow that. So these are a lot of really great advantages when you're talking about using your existing web development team and maybe developing more quickly than native apps and being able to update more quickly. But every technology especially comes with a trade-off. So what are you giving up, would you say, if you're going to be developing in a technology like Ionic?
I would say potentially there is a uh there's like maybe a slight kind of reactionary versus automatically getting new updates. So if for whatever reason iOS ships a new major version and they completely change the look and feel, it takes some time for us to make sure that our controls match that version.
Hmm.
While developers who are using, say, a native technology might be able to get that right away because they are utilizing some native controls. Um, that, though, does not feel like a big barrier to our approach, but it is something that people do need to keep in mind is that we are following whatever iOS is doing and trying to keep up to date with whatever changes they make.
Sure. So that applies to the new SDKs that come out in a new version of iOS too, that those lag a little bit.
Not that they lag, but there is some time as if iOS, I don't know, 18 ships on October 1st, we'll probably have to have the following week to where we can ship any support for it, or if we need to integrate it into our own core,
Mm-hmm.
where that kind of but we don't necessarily take those native projects and keep them in this isolated condition. So if iOS 18 ships and you need to use a new core feature, you still have full access to that API through the native project. So you can go in and can integrate it with it without waiting for us. We just take a little bit to make sure that our core, if we want to utilize something, it does take a little bit to update.
Okay, so you'd have to want to be pretty cutting edge, like a week ahead
Yeah.
to not be able to wait for that. What other trade-offs, if any, can you think of that exist in the hybrid mobile app development world compared to, let's say, native or other technologies?
I think the kind of classic one that people always go back to is very graphic intensive apps. I wouldn't say that it's impossible to build a game with JavaScript, but it might not necessarily be the right tool for the job. Especially with native platforms having direct access to low level graphics APIs, it kind of makes sense for you to go ahead and use those versus trying to make JavaScript work in a way that native just has a clear advantage to. So I particularly wouldn't try to build a mobile app, a mobile 3D game with JavaScript. You're probably better learning maybe something like Unity or going full native in that case.
Okay. Well, how about comparing Ionic to the plethora of other HTML-based technologies out there for building web apps? I know when you look at popularity, the Ionic is up high on that list, but I also know that it works a little differently than some of the other technologies. So can you kind of compare and contrast how an Ionic app works and why that's a benefit to the developer?
Yeah, I think we provide a little bit more of an opinionated approach to how you should do things. There's a couple solutions out there that are, hey, we give you the common building blocks, figure the rest out, where we provide a kind of structure approach like, no, you want to do routing? Here's how you do routing. If you want to do overlays or alerts, here's how you do those. And while some people think that they are limited in what they can do, I think it provides a little bit more of a predictable approach to how features get built out and how your app grows over time, versus trying to find a pattern amongst your team. If you work with already existing structures, you can kind of develop your own style within those barriers and know that things are going to work, hopefully, as expected.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the common complaints about hybrid mobile apps in general that you see developers mentioning online is, when they have old devices or particularly complex UIs, that the UI can have performance problems. Now, a lot of times what I've seen is that is using things, it's because the developer is using things incorrectly or they don't know what they're doing. So when you're using Ionic, what tips do you have for people who are getting started to avoid falling into that common pitfall?
I tend to like the approach of simplicity as like the cornerstone of everything, especially when it comes to UI. You don't need to overcomplicate things right at the start of your development process. Get things green first, and then maybe go through and start adding, okay, well, design said that we need to include some graphics in there. Once having to do that and then also build the rest of the app is a pretty bad approach, or less than ideal, maybe. If you focus on just getting your app functional and then trying to go ahead and add the additional 20% on top of it that makes it unique, you can spend more time on that 20% than if you were to try to just throw it in at the whole start of everything.
Okay. So the keep it simple rule, basically, keep it simple to start with. And if you're going to do animations or some kind of complex graphics or something in your forms, then add those gradually later.
Yeah. And utilize kind of the correct way to add like those nuances. I gave a talk actually at your conference about how you can add features to an app that make it unique and stand out, but not be a big performance overhead. So for like animations, make sure you're following the correct animation principles, like flip, first slash invert play. If you're doing complex UI, try not to include things like too many shadows or too many deeply nested divs. And look at things for like web workers if you are trying to do long, drawn out tasks. So that way you can focus, offload all of that onto a different thread, and then the main part of your app is nice and responsive.
Nice. So Ionic provides a bunch of SDKs that are JavaScript based that hook you into the different mobile SDKs under the covers. As you've written applications and helped other clients writing their applications, what native functionalities do you find the most challenging to integrate into from an Ionic app that way?
What's the most challenging approach to doing that, or what's the most challenging SDK to integrate? Kind of cut a little bit.
Okay. Yes. So let me ask you that question again. So
Yeah.
Ionic provides a bunch of SDKs that are for JavaScript that hook you into the underlying SDKs on the mobile platforms that allow you to integrate into different native device functionalities. So as you've been developing Ionic apps or helping clients develop them, what have you found to be the most challenging of those different native functionalities to hook into?
Probably the most challenging one that I think was NFC scanning, mostly because I'm not well versed in NFC or any of those like NFC, Bluetooth, that kind of like family of technologies is not something I like to work with. I'll say there is a fantastic community member in Ionic, who has done a bunch of plugins. His name is Robin Gens. He builds all these amazing like SDK adapters, and so he made a whole SDK adapter for NFC. And once you figure out the patterns on how you actually send commands or send data and get data back, the actual integration is super easy.
Okay. What about misconceptions as you're out there in the world teaching people about Ionic for the first time, introducing them to the technology? What are the most common misconceptions that you run into that you wish people that you could correct for people?
I would say that people think the web is slow and that native is the only performant way of doing things. I don't think that might have been the case like in 2015, but the web's pretty fast these days, and the things that you can do on the web are pretty impressive. So building things with the web isn't necessarily like a negative. Like, you should be proud that you're building with the web. It's a pretty adaptable platform.
Okay.
Also, that and like things like scrolling inside of a web app uses the same underlying system scroll view on iOS that if you were to create a scroll view in native iOS apps, it is the same layer under the hood. So our scrolling containers in Ionic are the same scrolling containers that you're using in native land.
Okay. Yeah, those are interesting misconceptions. I think, having done some hybrid development quite a few years ago, I wonder if those come from the old days of hybrid mobile apps where those maybe were issues 10 plus years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where developers, once they hear a negative connotation of something, it's hard to really change that perception unless you spend the time to show them and helpfully educate them.
Yeah.
That, hey, no, that's not the case. Maybe revisit it because it's actually quite good.
Yes, technology advances quickly, so if it was a problem 10 years ago, it doesn't mean it is today.
Exactly.
As a .NET developer, I run into the same thing with .NET. People still think of it as a Windows-only technology. It's been 8 or 9 years now that .NET Core and .NET have been rewritten.
Open source and part of the whole entire system.
Exactly. But you still run into those old misconceptions. So I want to bring up progressive web apps as well, because I know Ionic supports those. And I think in the developer community, there's some confusion just about, what PWAs are, when you would use them, how is it different than hybrid mobile apps? Could you talk a little bit about that and Ionic support for PWAs?
Yeah. I'll go on the record saying I despise the term PWAs.
Yeah, it's a confusing term.
It's a really great marketing term, but it adds more confusion than I think helps.
Yeah.
All a PWA really is a web app that feels like a native app. It's like added onto the home screen, and it goes through this secondary installation process. I don't think the installation process is something that you need to do, but a web app is PWA typically has like offline capabilities because they're caching assets using service workers. It has a themed a manifest file to provide more theming information. So when you go to that web app, all of a sudden your browser UI changes colors to match it. If you choose to install it onto the home screen, you get an icon, you get a launch image. Specifically on Android, they'll composite those two together and give you all that for free without you having to provide any of it kind of yourself. So it's essentially a web app with a little bit more, capabilities involved, but still a web app.
Yep. Okay, that's a great introduction to what they are. How does Ionic support them?
We integrate with a lot of the framework offerings out there. So I'm a big fan of Angular. Angular has a Angular PWA. We make sure that we are providing that out of the box, that all the configuration is already done for you. So by the time you go and build an app, you're kind of getting a PWA for free without having to actually do any of the additional steps. And we make sure to document all of that very carefully to provide the guidance for developers.
Okay. And now you mentioned Angular a couple of times, so let's talk about that. From its inception, I think Ionic paired by default with Angular, but that's not the only thing you can pair it with anymore. What other SPA frameworks are out there that you can use on Ionic?
So out of the box, we have support for Angular, React, and Vue. React and Vue being ones that we added roughly around 2018, 2019. Kind of forget. Timeline all blurs together. But we added those at a later point as folks really, really wanted to have more framework support, and we kind of wanted to do more as well. Unofficially, we have some community members who are providing support for things like Svelte and SvelteKit, which is increasingly becoming more and more popular. And then we also provide a package that is no framework adapters. You just get raw web components. So for whatever reason, you wanted to integrate it in, say, a WordPress plugin. You add a couple script tags and you get access to all those components.
Nice. So basically, whatever you want, but there's some things that are paved for you, some paths that are already paved.
Yeah, it's definitely some things that are, here are the, not approved, but here are the maintained ones by us. There's some community efforts, and then, hey, you want to go off on your own road and pave that? Go for it. We'll want to see how you do.
Good luck to you, and we're here to support you, right?
Exactly.
Well, so if you want to get started with Ionic, and maybe you've just heard about it in this conversation for the first time, where do you go to learn more about it and get started?
So you go to ionicframework.com. We have a whole getting started guide, basically walking you through either installing the SDK and installing everything, or we can give you a kind of guided tour of building out a web app with file system access, camera APIs, the whole slew of features that developers mostly want to get right away. So,
okay, sounds like a great set of documentation to get you started.
I think they are.
So final question I like to ask all my guests is about the theme of this podcast, which is making your software projects more predictably successful. We've been talking about Ionic and hybrid mobile apps, but what other topics or what other guests do you think we should have on matching that theme to talk about or our listeners to hear?
Ooh, so I have a friend, Josh Van Allen, who he works for a company called Hero Devs, and he's spent a lot of time in the enterprise software land. And he has some horror stories of projects that go off the rail, and some really good kind of guidance principles that he applies to his clients now. He has a lot of information that I think would be very valuable to share to listeners.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I would definitely like to reach out to him, and we can hear some of those stories and everything that he's learned from everything going wrong.
I'll definitely make an introduction.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today, Mike, going over Ionic and helping us understand how that can make our mobile development projects more predictably successful. Really appreciate your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to having you back sometime again soon.
Cool.
That's the end of this Blue Blazes podcast. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one with industry experts focused on how to make software projects more predictably successful, make sure to subscribe. Trailhead can be found online at trailheadtechnology.com, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks for listening.